This week on The Landline, we're tackling workplace conflict with Ashley Todd as our HR expert. Anytime you say, let's talk about difficult coworkers, there are like images that pop in people's heads like automatically, like bam, bam, bam. I got 3 or 4 of those. So I'm hoping people are going to be like, thank God Ashley walked into my life today.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
So, here to save a life if I can.
If you can. Or multiple.
Absolutely.
You never know.
I'm trying to save the whole entire workforce. If I could do that,
yeah.
I think that's fair.
That's
right?
fair.
That's fair.
How did you get into HR? I feel like as a kid, like no 4-year-old is like, I want to be in HR. Or was that your story?
That definitely was not my story.
Yeah.
Definitely not at 4. I got to be honest with you. I got into HR undergrad, did an internship, was like, this is absolutely not for me. I don't want to sit at a desk and talk to people all day. Ended up changing my major. And then when I graduated and got into the real world, I was like, I think I need to go back to school. So I went and got my master's, and I got my master's in HR.
Okay.
And labor relations, and did an internship at the same time with actually the same organization that I had did my internship with the first time when I was like, nah, this ain't for me.
Yeah.
But I really got to dive into a lot of HR concepts and theories, a lot of employee relations and things like that. And I was like, this is actually pretty fun. And it just seemed to naturally fit for me. So yeah, been doing it 15 plus years now.
That's awesome.
Point. Yeah, it's a long time.
Tell me, what does HR mean to you? What is the definition of HR to you?
I hate to be literal, right?
That's okay.
But literally, it is about people, right? It is about the humans within the workforce, right? Within our certain organizations or your organization that you work for. And the real importance of HR is that it's at the center of every organization. Literally, you think about it, right? You can't do the work that you need to do in order to produce whatever product or service that you have if you don't have people. And so it's really important to have a group of folks that take that into mind, whether we're talking about operational decisions or whether we're talking about navigating, workplace conflict. So
tell me, was there ever a situation that you found yourself in that you were like, oh, this is HR? Like, thank goodness you came to me and didn't try to handle this yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Is it like an all the time thing?
Yeah.
Like, should we always be going to HR?
What's so funny is that I highly, highly, highly recommend that you become friends with HR. And honestly, we want you to be friends with us. I like to always remind organizations like HR should always have a seat at the table, right? Because more than likely, you're going to be making a decision that's going to impact people, right? And so you want to make sure that the decisions that you're making that are impacting those people is that it's right, it's that it's aligned with your goals. So it's very funny. I have stories for days. I often say, like, I could probably retire and write a book.
Really?
Yeah,
already, you think?
Already. Stories for days. So.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm going to pull on some of those stories today. I'm very excited about hearing it, but I really want to make sure that we stay question focused today so that people can get the most out of our time here. So let's start with, how do you know that you have a difficult coworker, or how do you know that that difficult coworker may be you? How do you label a difficult coworker?
So there's a couple of things there, right? Yeah. Especially if it's you. Right? There's a level of self-awareness that very much needs to kind of come to the forefront if you are the problem, right? But the one thing that I will say that you can fully, like, almost define someone who is the problem child, or is there's a pattern of behavior, right? So oftentimes in workplace conflict, it's really not about a personality conflict, right? But it's really leaning into the behaviors. And so if you have somebody or know somebody or are that somebody who constantly leans into disruptive behaviors that are not efficient or collaborative, right? You might be the problem, or you could be working with somebody who is the problem as well.
Do you have an example of that, of like a behavior that someone might exhibit that's a red flag.
That's a red flag. So there's probably a couple of them.
Yeah.
And like I said, pattern, right? If you're noticing that this is pretty consistent, passive aggressive behavior for one is always a pretty red flag to me, especially if I'm seeing that consistently in somebody's interactions, right? Misinterpreted communications, right, or lack thereof communication can also be a major red flag. And I actually think that might be one of the concerns that people have with conflict is because they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. But oftentimes when it goes, unaddressed, that's typically when you have a lot of issues. And so even somebody who is avoidant, right, I would consider that a red flag, especially if you know that they are either in conflict a lot and they're constantly avoiding having those difficult conversations. Those would definitely be some red flags for sure.
You talked about people avoiding conversations. I feel like that happens a lot in the workplace. Like, we love gossiping. We love, talking about the shows that we watch on TV. But the minute you do something at work that hinders me getting my job done, it's like we can't talk anymore. Why do you think that is?
So avoiding the conflict is actually probably at one of the roots of the issue, right? Is because oftentimes when we don't address conflict, right, it goes unresolved, and then something called assumptions start to creep in, right? And so at that point, you're assuming a lot of things, oftentimes things that have absolutely nothing to do with you or even to the situation, right? And so I think that when we avoid conflict, very much is going to cause for escalation later on down the road, right? Because now there's probably a lot of other things that have crept in, right? So now every interaction that you could have with that potential person, you're second guessing, right? Or you're questioning, right? Maybe they forgot to CC you on an email and now you side eyeing them like, was that intentional, right? Or them, maybe misspelling your name, which happens quite a lot in the workplace. And once again, if it is a pattern, that would be cause for concern. But maybe it's a one-off, right? And because we have avoided an initial interaction, all of these other minor interactions or annoyances, I should even say, start to happen, and we start to really kind of side-eye it and question it. When in reality, it's probably not an issue, but because we didn't address it in the first place, it's now being perceived as one.
Or it could potentially roll into actual issues.
Yes.
Now people are making little comments or not CCing people on emails that should be.
Yep. It could turn into, now it is very much intentional, right? And so now I am persistently avoiding somebody because I don't want to have a conversation with you. Or once again, that very passive aggressive communication, it can very much escalate into that. And that once again is a really important reason why it's a good idea to address if you're comfortable, right? And it hasn't gotten to a point where it's hostile, but to address it. And there's ways to address it without it becoming explosive, right? But definitely addressing it when it's happened is key.
What advice do you have to people who want to address something with a coworker? You have different types of people, right? You have the person who's scared, I don't like conflict. I don't like anybody to not like me. And then you have the person that's say it to my face, we got problems. What's advice that you would give to those types of people? Let's start with the first one, somebody maybe who's a little bit more timid, not wanting to cause any issues.
Absolutely. So if you're conflict avoidant, right, you are someone who really steers away from conflict. You run away from it. You're absolutely not trying to touch it. This ain't the hill that I want to, that I'm willing to die on. Yeah. Right. One thing that I would recommend is to pause. I'd actually recommend that for every person, but is to pause and to really understand what's the absolute worst that can happen, right? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a simple conversation, right? But because we get into our head and because we start assuming a lot of things, we end up kind of scaring ourselves out of it, right? Versus, you know what, I can do this. I am capable of doing hard things, right? I know that that's a quote that a lot of the girlies are saying today, and I absolutely love that, because you can have this hard conversation, or this seemingly hard conversation. So if you're conflict avoidant, I would definitely take a step back, pause, understand what's really the worst that can happen, right? And what is it that I want to address? So.
And then what about the person who's like coming out strong? They're like, I've been hearing the stuff. I'm about to just go address it myself. Let's go.
So if you have somebody who is, don't want to say combative, right? But they're seemingly like they are very comfortable with conflict. For instance, myself, I'm very comfortable with conflict because I typically am navigating it quite often, right? But if you have somebody who is very comfortable with conflict, I always recommend, just as I would someone who is avoidant, to make sure that we pause, right? Especially if you're comfortable, because oftentimes you think I'm ready to go. Let's do this, right? Without giving any sort of understanding, I would say, to the other person who's going to maybe be receiving the message, right? So if you can, pause, right? And the next piece of advice I would say is seek to understand before seeking to be understood, right? Going into the conversation, especially if you are someone like myself who can present a very strong stance, a very like, yeah, let's go ahead, let's have this conversation. Yeah. What's the worst that can happen? We're just two adults talking, right? If you go into it with that mindset without really having the full picture, right? You're not going to create a positive conversation, right? Or a conversation that's collaborative at the very least. So it's very important to take a pause and seek to understand before seeking to be understood.
Someone comes into your office, they're like, hey, me and Girly, 2 cubicles down, like it's not going good. Now everybody in the office is feeling awkward. We got to address this. What's your next move?
We're going to address it, right? So you said a couple of things that I think are important, right? If there is ongoing conflict, and especially if that ongoing conflict has escalated, right? So maybe now it is disruptive in the work environment. Other people are also feeling the tension that's in the office setting. Once it gets to that place, it definitely needs to be escalated either to leadership, right, or whoever that next the next level or the next chain in command is, or to HR. And that's actually a very professional, respectful thing to do. I think sometimes people look at it as like, oh, they snitching, right? When in reality, it's like, hey, no, we need to be able to preserve the respect within this office. We also need to be able to work together. Yeah. And if we're not able to sit down and figure that out for whatever reason, then we do want to have somebody else who can go ahead and mediate that conversation, can help us to get there. And oftentimes, HR can very much do that, right? I think sometimes people get concerned, I don't want to go to HR because I don't want to get anyone in trouble. When in reality, it's not about getting someone in trouble, but it is about understanding what's the root cause of the situation, and let's come up with a solution so that way we can move forward.
How do you know when you need to deal with it yourself or when you need to go to HR? Like, what's that line?
Yes, that's a very good question, because sometimes people think, I got this. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and handle it. Now, I will say this. Most of the time, you should be able to manage conflict one-on-one, right, on your own. Obviously, it's depending on the situation that's at hand. If it is something where it's in regards to someone's safety, right, or the compliance or ethics of their actions, right, you might want to go ahead and at least let someone in leadership know, right, and just to at least say, hey, this is what has transpired. I'm not really sure how I can go about this. If it's none of those things, and this is something that might be more surface level or a first time kind of incident, go ahead and have that conversation. If you feel like we can't, or we tried and we are still not in a good space, I always say, let leadership know, right? It's okay, once again, to escalate things up. That doesn't mean that you're snitching. That doesn't mean that you're trying to get anyone in trouble. Because keep in mind, we should always be reporting things in good faith, right? Now, I know that sometimes that doesn't always happen, and people will run to leadership or run to HR because I'm going to go tell HR, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, what it really should be is like, hey, I just want us to be able to resolve this, right? And so I'm not looking at HR to come in and kind of be the big bad wolf and, put everybody in their corner and on timeout. I'm looking at HR because I want them to come in and help mediate this situation so we can work collaboratively.
I was just about to say, I think we need to change some of us, our mindset of what we think HR is.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely
think about them, like you said, like as mediators, this is just a third party to come in and kind of help us navigate the conversation rather than come in and now you're on this list where the next thing happens and I'm out of here because so-and-so decided to say that we had an issue.
Absolutely. I would love for people to take that away.
Yeah.
I love for people. Yeah, we're truly here to help, right? And oftentimes, while it may not feel like it for some, we should be playing the neutral party, right? Because we're going into the situation without really having much information. Hey, you've given me your side of the story, but they also need to give me their side of the story. And somewhere in there, in the middle, right, is truly what has happened. Because everybody's got their own assumptions and perceptions of the situation. And so sometimes you just need somebody to help, walk you through it and talk you through it.
Yeah. I want to give you a scenario, less serious, but it could like impact workspace. Say I'm working with somebody and the breath it's ripe. I'm like, okay, what do I do? What's the right way to go about this? Because like, I don't know, like if it was a friend, you might be like, oh girl, here's some gum. Or like, it's your man. You're like, oh, let's like brush our teeth together in the morning. Let's see what you got going on down there. But like, when you're in the workplace, those conversations seem to be harder to do. And when you bring them up to people, sometimes they just like laugh about it and like, oh, that's so funny that you have that issue. And then nothing gets resolved.
Yes.
What's your advice to the person who has the coworker with the ripe breath?
With the ripe breath. Oh my.
Yeah.
So
have you had a situation like this before?
You asked me, like, have I had, like, what are the situations that I've had? I've had multiple situations and conversations where I've had to talk with people about personal hygiene in general. Now, I will say, once it comes to HR for one of two reasons. One, someone just doesn't want to address it, right? Because inevitably it is uncomfortable, right? So they're like, well, I'm going to let HR go ahead and handle that conversation.
Yeah.
Or it has escalated for some reason, right? And when I tell you I've heard of situations, I've been involved in situations, I've seen people not want to address something, and so they like leave gum or leave, some sort of like smell good or spray on their desk.
Yeah.
And like, oh, hopefully they'll get the hint.
Yeah.
Right. And so I would say those are things that we don't want to do, right? We don't want to do that, right? People probably aren't going to like this response.
Okay.
But this is the real deal. There are going to be things that happen in the workplace that are seemingly minor annoyances, right? They are minor. It is annoying, right, that their breath is kicking. However, right, understanding, do they recognize that sometimes, and a lot of times, especially when it comes to things of hygiene and sanitation, sometimes people don't know, right? Or there might be other factors that are going on, right? So for instance, maybe they have a decayed tooth, but they're not able to go to a dentist because they either don't have access or they can't afford the benefits, right? And so we always want to just, like I said, seek to understand before seeking to be understood, right? Now, I'm not telling people to go out there and to ask somebody like, hey, your breath is ripe. Is there a reason for that? Right. But I am saying it might be a good idea, right? Sometimes there's minor annoyances and it's just kind of like, that's unfortunate. I'm going to just scoot my chair over slightly so that way I don't have to smell it. If it does, though, become disruptive, to the work environment, which we have, we very much have heard of situations like that, right? It could very much be the opposite. You have somebody who maybe wears a very strong cologne or perfume, and the person next to them is like, hey, I have an allergy and I'm very sensitive and this is causing me to have a reaction. That is very much something where you would want to bring that to HR and have that conversation. Or if you're comfortable, because maybe you have that relationship with that person, to kind of say, hey, is it possible I have an allergy and it seems to be flare up when, there's an excessive use of the perfume. Yeah. Do we mind taking it down just a bit, right? And oftentimes it's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. I did not know. Absolutely, right? So yeah, minor annoyances, if it's disruptive, right, then absolutely have a conversation if you can. If not, very much would escalate that to HR or to your leader if you're comfortable to do that.
What happens if I have an issue, I told my leader, things seem to not be getting better?
Yes. So that for sure would be a reason to go to HR, right? Once again, that's really why we're here, is because we can kind of help mitigate some situations that maybe sometimes leaders just don't have the influence, right? Or maybe they just don't have the knowledge to do, right? And so I would highly recommend, if a situation has escalated, you've gotten leadership involved, or you've gone kind of up that chain of command and you still feel like there is no resolve, you absolutely do want to get HR involved in that conversation and see where they can go. I will also say, sometimes people will feel like there's no resolve because they're not getting the outcome that they want, right? And so you do want to, people have to be reasonable, right? We have to remember we're in a work environment where we are surrounded by multiple personalities and opinions and things like that. And so how we may view or deem certain things may not necessarily be how we as the organization would view or deem that as well.
Yeah. There's something to that. Not getting the results that you want, and that doesn't mean that you didn't get results. Just because it doesn't look like, oh, that person is no longer on my team, I no longer have to, that person is no longer my leader, that person may still be my leader, and maybe there was a conversation that was had, or something like that. It's almost like you just have to trust that something happened.
Yes.
Which is a lot to ask of a person.
It is, especially when you're directly involved in it, right? Because you're wanting to know, like, well, what was said or what changed, right?
Right.
Especially if you are not noticing a change.
Yeah.
But I will tell folks this, they probably don't want to hear this either. But HR should not, like ever, right, be sharing what has been done in regards to other employees, right? So that's a very fine line. We always want to move with integrity, but also preserving the dignity of everyone that's involved.
Yeah.
And keeping confidence. So if there's a situation and you bring it to HR's attention and something does come of it, whether that is like formalized discipline for that other person, or maybe we're just making some necessary transitional steps, right? We are going to tell you the necessary information, right? Which typically is not going to include if there was anything formally done to somebody else, right? Now, we can't stop you from assuming if you all of a sudden notice that teammate that you reported and had a conversation with about is no longer on your team. It very much may mean that, hey, we went ahead and, moved some things around, or maybe they're no longer with the organization. But we would never outright tell someone that. Yeah. And I think that's oftentimes where some of that, I want to know what happened, or I want to know what was specifically said, kind of comes in.
What advice do you have to people that are worried about retaliation or are receiving retaliation after bringing something to HR?
Yes. So every organization should have a non-retaliation policy, right?
Yeah.
And so that in itself should very much be said, and it very much should be known. If you feel like you are being retaliated against, you absolutely need to let HR know. Even if HR is conducting the investigation, right? You want to let them know what's going on. In the same breath, I'm going to say something else that people might not want to hear, right? Perceived retaliation and actual retaliation are different things, right? So let's say that somebody has a concern in regards to their leader, and they feel like their leader is, nitpicking on them and all of the things, and they bring this concern to HR, and HR opens up an investigation. Your leader still has the right to go ahead and manage you as we would normally see fit, right? Unless there is something blaring, like, they're doing some truly malicious or malicious activity that's against a protected class, right? That's totally different.
Yeah.
But, your leader giving you an assignment or a task, right? That's still a part of their job. Your leader extending you feedback and coaching, that's still a part of their job, right? Now, if they're doing things like all of a sudden it's, it's time for raises, and they're like, we're going to go ahead and give you nothing, right? And that maybe is very much against company policy or not in alignment with maybe your merit increase process. That would potentially be retaliation. And that for sure would absolutely be something that HR would want to know, and they would get involved in, and they would rectify that situation.
We hit on it a little bit earlier, but how do you know if you're the problem?
Ooh.
I know you said that takes a lot of self-awareness.
Yes.
But if you only have a little bit of that, not a whole bunch.
Not a whole bunch
of self-awareness, how do you know? It might be me. I might be the issue here.
So I think that if you don't have the level of self-awareness and you live kind of like on Delulu land, right, you may never think that you're the problem, right? I always go back to pattern, right? Yep. Is there a pattern, right? I've worked with people who have been put on multiple different teams, right? Or have been moved to multiple different teams because they're not getting along with the rest of their team, right? And one would say, well, where's the common problem, right? And I will tell you, HR has those very transparent conversations, right? At least I do. I'm not afraid to lean into those, because it does that person no justice, right? Or no service if they don't know that, hey, let's lean inward, right? Let's talk about some of these patterns that we've been seeing, right?
Yeah.
Because we may have done X, Y, and Z, and we're still seeing X, Y, and Z. And so I think that if you can't lean into that, and you're not willing to, like I said, get off of Delulu land, it is going to be very difficult for you to really recognize that you probably are the problem. But like I said, I would lean into, are there patterns there?
What advice do you have for people who are just getting started in HR and they're starting to have their first hard conversations with people?
Oh, that's a good question. So many points. I'd probably give them a couple of pieces of advice, but I think the biggest piece is pause. And I know I had said that prior to, but I really do feel like some of the most difficult conversations that I have had to have, right? Whether they are related to reduction in forces, whether they're related to employee relation issues, I have always given myself 24 hours to think on it. Right now, there have been moments where I got to make a quick decision and I got to have a quick conversation, and I just don't. Right. And hopefully you get to a space where you can have a little self-talk with yourself, like, okay, calm down. This is our talking points. Stay focused. Right. But if you're afforded the opportunity you have some time before you have to have some very uncomfortable or very contentious conversations, give yourself 24 hours. Sleep on it.
Yeah.
Think about, what is the message that I'm trying to send? What's the goal, right? What am I trying to get to?
In a world where it seems like it's becoming more and more appropriate to have personal conversations at work where we're sharing a little bit more about our beliefs and our morals and things like that, what advice do you have for people that find themselves in a work environment where it seems like the people around them don't think the same way they do? how do you move past that? How do you still just stick to the business and not make things personal?
So, couple of things there. One, I would say understand your organization and the culture of your organization. I have worked in some organizations where I knew I was not aligned, right? Like from a value set perspective, like, oh, how I feel and what I believe in regards to X, Y, and Z, this organization does not, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that, because if you know that, it almost brings you a level of peace, because you'll be like, all right, I'm just gonna sit back, right? This isn't my fight. This isn't my conversation to be had. But if you have an organization, or you work in an organization that is much more open and is much more transparent and is much more authentic, I say do what feels best, but also know, right, people are not monolithic. And in the workplace, we are going to have varying personalities. You're going to have varying opinions, right? You're going to have varying beliefs. And so you're going to have to understand that that may be not in alignment with you. And that's okay, right? As long as it is not, I would say, disrespectful. And I even know that that can be very gray today, of like what's disrespectful and what's not. People are still going to need to have conversations, right? And a lot of organizations today in 2026, they are having those conversations. They're having the uncomfortable conversations about what's happening in the world and where do we stand on certain issues. And so you want to just make sure we pause before you make your comment. Understand, like, how is this going to land, right? You may think it's a joke. That's not a joke. That wasn't funny, right? And hopefully you have somebody on your team or in that space who's comfortable to be like, hey, that did not land how I think you thought it was going to land, right? This is what I heard, and I don't think that was your intent. But once again, an opportunity to lean in and have a conversation, because we don't want conflict, right? But yeah, if you work for an organization where you guys are having those sort of conversations, lean in. But I would also make sure that we are taking a pause before we're just haphazardly talking.
Any last bit of advice for the people that are going to listen to this pod?
HR is your friend. We really are. I know people don't sometimes feel that way, but we really are. But when it comes to navigating conflict, especially in the workplace, address it, right? Let's not avoid it. We want to address it in a respectful manner, but also pause, right? Give yourself some time to think about the messaging. Like I said, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And at the end of the day, you got to remember, workplace conflict is normal, right? It is a very normal thing. Just like there's going to be conflict in our personal lives, it will show up in the work environment as well. But hopefully if you address it soon enough, it won't escalate.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Landline. Make sure you come back next Monday for an all new episode.